Hello, everyone, and welcome to Depave Paradise's 10th anniversary. Thank you for joining us today for this forum, Breaking Ground Collaborative Community Greening. My name is Eric, and I'll be joining today's virtual community forum from Toronto, Kanyatario, homeland of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. We invite you to introduce yourself and to also acknowledge the land where you're joining in from by using Zoom's chat function found in the control bar at the bottom of the window. In Zoom's control bar, you will also find the option for enabling subtitles and live transcription. However, please understand that Zoom's automatic transcription is not quite perfect and may make some mistakes. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be provided as a courtesy to registrants who are unable to attend, or those of you here who may momentarily miss a portion of the proceedings. During the presentations, we ask that you remain muted so as to allow presenters and speakers to be heard clearly. During the panel discussions, we ask that you use Zoom's raise hand function to enter the speaking queue. The function is found within the reactions smiley face plus button in the control bar, where you may also choose to display a temporary on-screen emoji. The chat box is also available during this period for your questions and comments. Lastly, if you're comfortable with it, we ask that you turn on your cameras to help inject a tiny bit more human interaction into our very digital days. This way, we can all be present, participating in this moment together. Well, that's enough from me, so I'll be turning it over to your host for today, Emily Amon, to get this party started.
Hello, everyone. I know people will continue streaming in a bit past the hour, but we have a full agenda today, so I'm going to get started. I'm excited to be bringing folks together today to talk about the Depave program, an incredible project that I've been grateful to be a part of for the past 2 years, and which many of you have been supporting or working on for far longer than that. Depave Paradise is a collaborative project that is strengthened by all the partnerships it spurs, and so it's wonderful to have an opportunity to discuss it and celebrate its successes together today. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and take a moment to reflect on the lands I join you from today. My name is Emily Amon, and I'm the Water Programs Lead at Green Communities Canada. Though I grew up in Ontario and spent much of the last 10 years in Peterborough, or Nogo-Jiwanong, I currently call a 5.5-acre homestead on Salt Spring Island, BC, home, although not for much longer. The Coast Salish peoples inhabit the northwest coast of North America, from the mouth of the Columbia River in Oregon, north to Boot Inlet in British Columbia. Coast Salish territories include much of the ecologically diverse Georgia Basin and Puget Sound, known as the Salish Sea. This huge drainage basin comprises the coastal mainland and Vancouver Island from Campbell River and Georgia Strait south through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the Lower Fraser Valley, and the lowlands of Puget Sound. Archaeological evidence of human occupation in this coastal marine area is extensive and ancient, dating back some 8,000 years. Salt Spring Island's history is a microcosm of British Columbia history, with a long period of Indigenous habitation, followed by settler colonial society of loggers, fishermen, farmers, and even some miners. Salt Spring is part of the traditional territory of the Saanich, Cowichan, and Chemainus First Nations. Among them are two main language groupings, the Hul'qumi'num and Senkotan-speaking peoples. With the retreat of the glaciers and stabilization of present landmass, the seasonal cycles of resource extraction by Hul'qumi'num-speaking First Nations became established. Nowhere else in what is now British Columbia was such food procurable in such variety and abundance. People accessed resources throughout the year. The elders say that Huachmalach place names describe either what grows there or how the land was shaped or what had happened to the landform. To give but a few examples, Wakwam, which means Merganser Duck Place, is the ancient name for Burgoyne Bay on Salt Spring Island and describes the valuable food source found there at a certain time of year. Statix, or Halipit, was the name given Long Harbor on Salt Spring Island to indicate the fish found there, and the north end of the island, Paquinup, or White Ground, describes the white-shelled beaches created by millions of discarded, bleached shells produced by the harvesting and processing of clams. Permanent settlements have fluctuated over the years, with the main centers of population at Walnuts or Fulford Harbor, Shiawut or Ganges, and Stabith or Long Harbor. A major epidemic in the 1780s and subsequent warfare with northern peoples shifted resident populations to villages on Vancouver Island, Cooper Island, and Valdez Island, from which the various families continued to access their lands and resources on Salt Spring. Indigenous people remained at the present-day Tsawit Reserve on Fulford Harbor until the 1920s, making this the longest continually occupied place on the island. I am grateful and wish to acknowledge the Hokuminam and Senkotan-speaking peoples for the ongoing and historic reciprocity with the lands that I now call home, and importantly, I wish to recognize that no treaties were ever signed between European settlers and the First Nations in the territories on the Gulf Islands or Vancouver Island. This is all unceded land. Coast Salish territories were divided in 1848 by an artificial boundary between Canada and the USA, and large populations of settlers formed at Victoria, Vancouver, Seattle, and elsewhere. These areas are predicted to grow by about 40% over the next 20 years. So the problem of urban sprawl and resource development and its destruction of First Nation heritage is one of increasing concern. The desecration of ancient middens and burial sites continues at an alarming rate in BC due to increasing urban sprawl. Roads, subdivisions, golf courses, resorts, all of these environmentally destructive developments take place on contested land that is either crown land owned by the public, private land preempted by settlers, or reserve land alienated by the government. Furthermore, Vancouver Island is home to some of the last remaining intact old-growth coastal temperate rainforest ecosystems, irreplaceable tracts of 2,000-year-old Douglas fir and western red cedar that provide refuge to a vast number of endangered species, including the marbled murrelet, western screech owl, and other ecosystem services such as filtering and infiltrating water, soil retention, carbon sequestration, and providing vital food and medicine for local Indigenous communities. This past summer, I felt called to participate in solidarity actions, standing up against old-growth logging in the Fairy Creek watershed alongside elders and community members from Pacheedaht and Dididat territories. In the photo on this slide, you see me in front of the grandmother tree, just one example of what is at risk of loss in this watershed. The Coast Salish Gathering's mission is to restore, preserve, and protect our shared environment and natural resources in ancestral homelands, the Salish Sea. Here's a quote from the gathering in 2017. Our ancestors have passed down the traditional teachings of songs, dances, and spiritual ceremonies that depict our identity and strengthens our peoples. Our sacred trust has been given to us from our ancestors and defines our role as protectors of our Mother Earth. We are entrusted with the protection and sustainability of the environment and natural resources of our ancestral lands and waters of the Salish Sea. Over the decades, our lands and waters have been severely impacted by pollution that affects our culture, food, health, and economy. Most importantly, hurting our elders who have relied on these since the beginning of time and threatening the lifeways of our children's future. When I think about this history and the current conflicts over land and resources in this region, I can't help but bring to mind this quote from North Face founder Doug Tompkins from the documentary film 180 Degrees South. He says, and in response to people saying you can't go back, well, what happens when society gets to the cliff? You can take one step forward, or you can turn around 180 degrees and take a step forward. Which way are you going? And which way is progress? I personally am a big fan of the pivot. Despite the doom and gloom we're fed, I do not think we're past the point of no return. And even if we are, I see it as my obligation and all of our obligation to work towards protecting, repairing, and restoring all that we've got left. I know you all agree, or you would not be here joining me today. The Depave project provides meaningful opportunities to expand the imagination and rethink permanence. We look at an old abandoned lot and say, so what if it's paved? We could remove that. We can restore that. We can return it. Together, with many hands, we can transform this space into something new. Land back movements have grown in momentum across Turtle Island in recent years. And while this can and should include direct signing of title lands back to Indigenous communities, I believe this can also include the return of Indigenous historical names for place, the return of native plants and medicines among the landscape, and the return of nature where there was once paved surfaces. So with that in mind, I wish to welcome you to today's forum, Breaking Ground, Collaborative Community Greening with Depave Paradise. We're so glad that you could be here, and we look forward to sharing today with you. Today's agenda looks like this. We will begin with an introduction about the Depave program, and I'm very excited to share a new Depave promotional video that we've had made. We'll then have a discussion about placemaking with Depave Paradise with Helena Cousins and Adele Pierre. They will be discussing some of the incredible projects that they've been involved with in Barton Street Village in Hamilton, Ontario. Next up, Haley Goodchild from Peterborough Greenup will be facilitating a panel discussion on diverse support for the Depave program, alongside some past partners and volunteers. Last but not least, Vincent Ouellet-Jobin from Montreal Urban Ecology Centre will present on participatory planning tools for Depave projects, closing out the first half of our forum and leading us into a short break. After the break, we'll have 2 30-minute workshops geared towards folks involved in depaving and green infrastructure projects. First, on-site maintenance and planning with Carrie McDonald from Environment Network, followed by Beatriz Gomez, who will present on plant selection for Depave sites. And that's that. It's a full afternoon or morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. So let's get started. Green Communities Canada is a national association of 22 community-based environmental nonprofits. Our mission is to connect community-based climate action groups through a national network to share resources, inspire innovative programming, and elevate our collective impact. We do this by developing and coordinating national water, energy, and active transportation programs. We provide training, funding, knowledge transfer, and administrative support directly to grassroots community organizations, alongside opportunities for online learning, workshops, and webinars. I'll certainly spend some time telling you about the Depave program today, but first I thought I'd try to show you. So without further ado, I'm pleased to share this new introductory video with you.
It's a really critical time as we're thinking about how to create this city of the future and how to ensure that that's sustainable and resilient to climate change, that we are prioritizing green space wherever it's possible. The Depave Paradise program brings citizens and organizations, municipalities together to work collaboratively to create a beautiful and treasured green space. So we transform impermeable spaces like parking lots or unused pieces of road, and turn those into green spaces that provide an ecological benefit by allowing the rainwater to flow into the ground where it's filtered and where it reduces the risk of flooding. Depave Paradise programs are one of the really tangible ways that residents can take climate action in their cities. When we talk about climate change, it can feel like a really insurmountable global challenge. And I think folks really struggle to figure out how they can have an impact in their communities. But Depave Paradise creates that opportunity. It's a very hands-on and grassroots process that engages people in the process of transforming their communities to make them more resilient. One of the things we really notice when we're doing these projects, these Depave projects in the city, is how happy people are. Not only when they're involved in the depaving or the planting, but also using the spaces after. Green space in our city has a significant impact on mental health and the wellness of residents, and the more green space that people have access to, the better their mental health is. People can transform a space that is otherwise impermeable into a green space that reduces flooding, improves the urban forest, creates habitat for the creatures, the birds and the bees that we share our city with. And that's a really positive long-term impact that increases the resilience of our communities to climate change. In combination, all of those pockets of green space will have a really significant impact on community resilience and and on the health of our cities.
So, what is Depave Paradise? Well, the core of it is quite simple, really. At Depave Paradise events, local volunteers gather to reclaim public spaces and soil. Using pry bars and shovels, community members break up an area of unused pavement and transform it into a living green space. There are many folks involved in the Depave program. The program is essentially coordinated by myself at Green Communities Canada, but I'm only one tiny part of this project. We help to train and support local coordinators from GCC member organizations across the country. These coordinators partner with site hosts, local funders, other local community groups, contractors, and citizens to redesign and depave their site. The question always comes up, why do we depave? And once that's answered, the follow-up, why by hand? So I'll do my best to answer it. Depaves are fun events that excite the community. They're a spectacle. Everyday citizens using hand tools to participate in the demolition of a road or parking lot. They provide an opportunity for people to take part in creating real changes in their communities. And the sites themselves provide tangible contributions to flood reduction, regreening, urban habitat, and water quality protection. So why do we depave? Well, have you looked around? Unused pavement is all around us. Rapid urbanization has led to the proliferation of hard surfaces that make it impossible for rain to drain back into the natural environment. Instead, this rain passes over polluted surfaces, collecting contamination, and is then rapidly conveyed into stormwater systems that divert it directly into local water bodies. The result? Increased flooding and poor water quality. And these issues are only getting worse with climate change. Depave sites provide vital flood reduction by enabling water to infiltrate back into the ground and diverting it from traditional gray infrastructure. And you see those plants in there? They actually take up harmful contaminants from stormwater. And as the rain garden drains, these pollutants are filtered out, improving local water quality and protecting our environment. Not to mention, these green spaces support local pollinators and other urban wildlife. It seems like a win all around. Why else might we depave? Well, almost all our North American cities were designed for cars, rather than for the humans or nature that actually inhabit them. But it doesn't take a pandemic to realize that green spaces are much more than just about trees. Green spaces provide vital mental health support and opportunities for community connection, all while reducing local flood risk and cooling ambient temperatures through shade. In historically Black and marginalized neighborhoods, redlining practices have led to many communities lacking in meaningful green space. Depaving in these locations provides an opportunity to rebalance that historic inequity and redesign community spaces with people at the forefront. Depaving helps us to revitalize community spaces for the community and with the community. We try to involve local citizen groups in participatory design charrettes to enable people to make decisions about the changes they will see. This empowers folks that may not traditionally feel included in local planning to see themselves in this new community space and invest in the project in a tangible way. So how did all of this get started? Well, the Depave program originally began in Portland, Oregon, by a group known simply as Depave. Their first major project was in 2008, when they created Fargo Forest Garden at a housing cooperative, landscaping the space as a perennial food forest with fruit trees and herbs, designed with permaculture principles. GCC's first Depave was at the Mulberry Waldorf School in Kingston in 2012. Red Squirrel Conservation, then known as Hearthmakers Energy Cooperative, organized this event in collaboration with community partners. It provided a hands-on training opportunity to the first Depavers, who went on to host their own events in cities across Ontario. Soon after, the Depave program started catching on across Canada with ever-growing results. Fun fact, in 2019, Red Squirrel returned to this site and removed even more asphalt. The first year was small but mighty. There was the rear parking lot of the Blue Mountain Arts Foundation in Collingwood, Ontario, led by Environment Network. The Mulberry Waldorf School in Kingston, Ontario, led by Red Squirrel. A paved boulevard beside a grocery store parking lot in Toronto, Ontario, led by LEAF, Local Enhancement and Appreciation of Forests. A paved boulevard beside a parking lot across from City Hall in North Bay, Ontario, led by Greening Nipissing. And the schoolyard at St. Augustine School in Hamilton, Ontario, led by Green Venture. So where are we now? Well, now we've depaved 65 sites in 29 cities, removing over 14,000 meters square of paved surfaces and involving over 4,000 volunteers. And by June of 2022, another 15 sites will have been completed. Depaves have taken place in 6 provinces: Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. And this year, the first depave will take place in Saskatchewan. As a side note, if you're on this call and you're from BC and you want to start depaving in your community, please email me after this. I'd really love to get some projects happening out here. Collectively, we have removed over 2.5 football fields worth of material and annually divert nearly 6 Olympic swimming pools worth of stormwater. This prevents 25,400 kilograms, or the weight of nearly 15 cars worth of pollutants, from entering local water bodies each year. Beyond the environmental benefits, there are meaningful social outcomes for depaves, depending on their location. Depaves have taken place at schools, creating outdoor classrooms and opportunities for nature-based education. Some sites have installed community gardens, making it possible to grow healthy organic food in what was once unused space. Other sites have had a role in connecting local parks and trails and educating communities and local decision makers about stormwater management and the importance of permeable surfaces in urban areas. Depaves have taken place at community centers, churches, and universities and colleges as well. They're great volunteer events and can create an awesome space that people feel proud of. So in summary, why do we depave? To transform public spaces and increase equitable access to green space. To empower citizens to take grassroots climate action. To restore nature and natural drainage. To increase climate resilience. And to raise support for green infrastructure among decision makers. Thank you. I'll now pass it over to Helena from Green Venture and landscape architect Adele Pierre to discuss the Barton Street projects in Hamilton, Ontario.